New York City is the place where they said, hey babe, take a walk on the wild side. I said, hey Joe, take a walk on the wild side. Sugar Plum Fairy came and hit the streets, looking for soul food and a place to eat. Went to the up high low, you should have seen them go, go, go. They said, hey sugar, take a walk on the wild side. I said, hey babe, take a walk on the wild side.
Welcome and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Civic Lab TO curriculum session focused on arts, culture, and community resilience. As this meeting is both in person and we are also not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that this land acknowledgement may not be for the territory that you're currently on. We ask that if this is the case, you acknowledge the traditional territory where you are situated and the current treaty holders. For those of us here in Toronto, I'd like to acknowledge that the land we are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. So hello, I'm Dr. Sarah Diamond. I'm President Emerita and Research Chair and faculty at OCAD University. So of course I care about the past, present, and future of the arts in the city. I wear a few other hats which excite me about today's presentations and discussions. I chair the Toronto Arts Foundation Board, the companion organization of the Toronto Arts Council, which you're going to hear a little bit about today. And on Wednesday night this week, we raised over $1 million at the Mayor's Evening for the Arts. So I've been a very strong proponent and supporter of public art in Toronto as well. And if you were here for the last session, you know I work a lot with urban development and care very much about complete communities, and arts and culture is critical there. So it makes me very excited today. So to provide a very brief description of the event, the Civic Lab TO curriculum is presented by Strategic Partnerships and the City Manager's Office within the City of Toronto in collaboration with the 8 higher education institutions represented here today. Civic leaders from the city and the higher education organizations are forging a path of partnership and innovation between us. This work includes a framework to facilitate city and academic collaboration on multidisciplinary research projects, which inform public policy and programs, ongoing connections on shared strategic priorities, and this very unique Civic Lab TO curriculum program. So we're really excited that we're in council chambers this year. It's a very special learning space to be in, and we are very happy to share this opportunity with you. So a couple of housekeeping items. Today's session is recorded and participants are asked not to share any personal information within the meeting other than our two students at the end who will say a few things. The session will be available on www.civiclabto.ca or www.civiclabto.ca curriculum and made available to your instructor in the near future. And if you've joined us in person in council chambers, welcome. And please note that you are asked to avoid using the virtual WebEx webinar. Wow, that is really hard to say. And the washrooms are located in the hallways by the elevators. There will be time for Q&A at the end of today's event. And I'll go through that process after we hear from our fabulous speakers. Anyone joining us virtually will be manually muted during the event. And if you are in council chamber and have joined the WebEx meeting, please mute your device's speakers. So drum roll. Today we are going to hear from Aderonke Akande, the Director, Arts and Culture Services, Economic Development and Culture, Karen Carter, the Director, Museums and Heritage Services, Economic Development and Culture, then Mike Tanner, Manager, Music Sector Development, Economic Development and Culture, and then Jason Thorne, Chief Planner and Executive Director, City Planning. So, without further ado, Aderonke Akande, welcome to the podium.
Thank you so much. Welcome everybody to Toronto City Hall Council Chambers. Exciting to be in this space for a conversation about the city, arts, culture, community, all the things that I love. I will say just a hint about myself before starting into a preset deck. So I am the Director of Arts and Culture Services, been in that role with the city for about 2 years, but I've been with the city for 15 years. I started, so the words arts, culture, and community all have significance to me and my personal career path. I started in the arts. I was a theater kid and studied theater, actually studied theater and economics, so it's not odd that I'm with the Economic Development and Culture Division. Worked in film. I am an urban planner, I'm a project manager, and all of those things eventually brought me to the City of Toronto, where I worked on in the community side, on community infrastructure and social development and community development, all things that really directly are critical and important in terms of city building and how your city is shaped, but also in terms of the culture of the city. So when all of those things could come together as the head of Arts and Culture Services, I said, yes, please, and here I am. Excited to talk to you about a few things, and maybe just to give a bit of information. Next slide. So where many of us hail from, and I'll just, sorry. Okay, next slide. Thanks. So the Economic Development and Culture Division, we really hold those two things in our hands. So, you know, really working in multiple ways to make the city a place where business and culture thrive. And I always say, you know, we have this tendency to talk about culture as either super fun, entertaining, engaging, joy, or broccoli. Really good for you, super important, oh my gosh, eat it. But the piece that we don't often talk about is arts and culture as a major contributor to the economy. So, you know, as it says here on the slide, $8.4 billion of the city's GDP are contributed by culture, and almost 150,000 jobs. So culture is really great, enjoyable, joyful, important, like broccoli, and a significant contributor to the economy in Toronto. One of the things that I'll focus on is, work that we wrapped up this time last year. So Culture Connects is a 10-year culture plan, a 10-year plan for culture in Toronto. It's an action-oriented plan, so 4 priorities, 28 actions. We brought that plan to council, and it was adopted, as I say, around this time last year. Won't go into this deeply, but just to say that to come to a plan that really says what are we doing for the next 10 years, not just within the city related to culture, or within the sector related to culture, but what's happening in terms of culture in Toronto. That doesn't come from just us sitting in an office in City Hall. We need to talk to people. And we spoke to over 4,000 people. We had various ways that people could connect with the conversation and really provide feedback both about what are the concerns, what's the problem we need to solve, and how might we go about doing that. And one of our really strong partners in that work is the Toronto Arts Council. So unlike many cities, the City of Toronto has an arm's length Arts Council that we work with. They provide, not only do they directly deal with a significant portion of the granting that the city provides to arts organizations, cultural institutions across the city, but they also provide a lot of advice, and we work quite collaboratively in moving together. So in developing something like Culture Connects, that conversation with the Arts Council was critical, along with many others. Next slide. One of the things that's important when we're thinking about where we're trying to get to, so a 10-year plan, is really understanding what are the things hitting us and shaping culture today. And some of these you may already think of instantly, like digital transformation and innovation. Where does AI sit in a world of creativity? But also, what about how audiences have changed? Did we come out of COVID and go back to doing the same thing? Are we still going to buy our season's tickets to name your popular event, or are we going to take things in differently? How has funding changed? Do we still have the same focus and emphasis? Space is something that's critical. Where does the climate crisis sit in all of this? Accessibility, affordability, diversity, equity, all of those things are critical considerations as we move forward. Where does reconciliation sit in all of this? So these are all, I'm sort of giving you a flavor of how you move from let's develop a 10-year action plan for culture to the considerations that need to be part of that process. So coming out of all of those conversations and really taking the challenges and the things shaping culture today into mind, we came up with this vision, which is really Toronto is a city where everyone can discover, create, and experience culture. So really taking into account that accessibility, the equity pieces, the diversity and range of experiences, and the fact that people come to culture in different ways as creators, as those that want to experience it, and you know, all of those things are part of a successful plan. Next slide. 4 priorities, and I'll just touch on each as I go through them. Culture Everywhere really speaks to the space crisis. So one of the things that we heard was critical is space to create, space for organizations to thrive, space to gather. All of these things are a threat, and that creates a challenge. when we think of where culture's going in the future. The instability there, the affordability, all of those things are quite a challenge. So in recognition of that, a significant portion and focus of the plan is under this space priority, and we make a commitment to bring forward 1 million new square feet of creative space over the 10 years of the plan. Culture for All speaks to access, speaks to diversity of access, and speaks to the fact that right now we know that there's a concentration of where cultural experiences happen and where investment is happening. Excuse me. And a lot of that is within the core of the city, but not necessarily in areas beyond that. So Culture for All really talks about making cultural experiences available across the city. Culture for the Future speaks to sustainability, it speaks to innovation, it speaks to a lot of the challenges that were raised in terms of what do we do as costs are rising, as audiences are changing, as technology is shaping how we do culture differently. What is the response? And what is the financial sustainability that we bring to this? So both of those elements are captured in this idea of Culture for All. Culture Beyond Our Borders speaks to the fact that Toronto really is a global cultural and creative center. And it's about reasserting our place and programmatically as a city supporting actions that help us to do that. Next slide. So let's make this a little bit real. Sorry, I'm talking up here. So let's make this a little bit real in terms of what's happened in the first year. So just gathered some points in terms of year one of Culture Connects and how we have invested in and connected with culture. So it's a range of things. It's, commitment through the budget process to an additional $2 million to the Toronto Arts Council. So directly funding that can help to support stability, greater access, diversity, range of cultural experiences. At the same time, as part of the 2025 budget, so the budget that was passed earlier this year, we for the first time indexed cultural grants to match inflation. So what hadn't happened before is, you had your pool of $20 million, and that was the pool for cultural grants. Inflation kept doing its thing, going up, but the pool stayed the same. So what we were able to do, with great support from the mayor and from city council, was to actually index so that those grants are now indexed to match inflation, increased to match inflation. More support for festivals. So festivals are a key element of vibrancy within the city, bringing people in, so visitors, and also visitors within your own city, which I think is such an important thing, checking out those things that are outside of your neighborhood, but also really cool. So both increasing funding to our standing festival funding program and then creating a new one, which really focused on an issue that was raised to us. So safety and security costs in particular for festivals were noted as an issue. And so we found funds to support that. We have launched, and this is a hats off to my colleagues in the Film and Creative Industries Group, their work to launch a new Creative Industries grant program is one of the things that's happened in our year one. Supporting company projects and organizations through Catalyst and Transformation Fund. So really that's support for organizations that are changing. That's a reality. If you've been around for a number of years, you might hit a point where it's like, how do we shift so that we're still relevant and doing the things we want to do? We're taking in that next generation voice. So providing support to that is one of the things that we do as a city. Providing support for our local art service organizations and additional funding there, another area where we've provided some funds. And then supporting organizations to attract private sponsorship and funding through work with group Business in the Arts and their Arts Fest program. That's important too, because realistically, there's only going to be a finite amount of money that we have within the city that we can invest, and all governments will have the same challenge. So being able to help to grow the skill of going out and finding other funds elsewhere is a really important piece. I have no idea where I am time-wise.
I can tell you exactly.
You have to be honest.
You have 3 minutes.
I have 3 minutes. This is amazing. I don't need 3 minutes. Anyway, I just wanted to take one quick second and dig into what are we moving towards? What's one thing that we're digging into now? And as part of the conversation to create Culture Connects, and as part of the conversation in general, we heard a lot about festivals and particular challenges that festivals and events were facing across the city. So we've had a big focus on how we provide strategic support for festivals. That's happening in many ways, and that's important because there's over 1,000 festivals and events annually across the city. If it seems like it's really busy every weekend, particularly in the summer, it is. I've tried to go to, the events that are happening all around the city in one weekend, and my running shoes ran out. Over 180 public venues. There is a big concentration, though, in terms of the popular spots where everybody wants to be. So how do we deal with that geographic tension if everybody wants to be in the same place? The attendance piece is phenomenal. So the impact of these festivals, over 16 million visitors annually, and the big ones, and you see the larger festivals, but also some of the smaller and more neighborhood-based festivals are significant draws. The picture that was in the slide previously is Taste of Lawrence Festival. That street is packed for that entire weekend. And the impact of festivals is huge. So our kind of what is looking ahead as something we're digging into, looking at a sector-specific strategy that will sit with Culture Connects, but speak directly to festivals in the city of Toronto. I'm going to skip the next slide and just go to my end because I know I'm done. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to ask Karen Carter to come and speak.
Morning. How are you? Are you here? Just checking in, making sure. My name was already stated, and so you know that. I come to this place of heritage and culture through an honest interest from an undergrad degree in history and a teaching degree in history at York. I did one of those concurrent education programs. Some of you are nodding, so you know what I'm talking about. And then I did a master's in education. So I always say that I'm a weird fish in that I came into my work in arts and culture through an education lens, but I think it also very much situates my interest in community cultural practice. I'm very interested in how heritage, culture, the arts intersect, and how those three things allow people to better understand the place they're in and their relationship as human beings to that place and the stuff that is a part of the narrative for museums. Whether a history museum or a fine art museum, the stuff, the fine art, the old paintings, the ephemera. We had a great run with the Blue Jays, and that led us to a component of our collection of showing things from our Blue Jays three-peat in the 90s. And it just reminded us about how the things we have, the objects that we hold dear are significant because of the stories that they tell us. So that's a bit about me. I worked at the city in the mid-2000s on the last attempt at a museum for Toronto, and I'll probably wrap up by connecting the dots of that to this current time as we are looking at potential uses for Old City Hall and hoping that a museum will be a part of that mixed use of that mammoth building. Next slide. So there are 10 historic sites that make up the portfolio for the City of Toronto's museums. That includes 7 which are historic houses, and then 3 that are historic sites. So some of you might know Fort York. Some of you might know the Market Gallery, which is above St. Lawrence Market, which is going to be a focus for us in helping us to bring out our fine art collection. And then Zion Schoolhouse is one of the ones that's often lesser known, but it's a beautiful schoolhouse in North York. Any of you, just by show of hands, have ever been to any of the City of Toronto museums? Wow, well done. Okay then, that's good. That makes me very happy because often I'm in rooms and people are like, I don't know. So you might have been, but you don't even necessarily know that it is a historic site and under our umbrella. So we're interested in doing the work that allows us to lead in conversations around historic sites. Those of you who are heritage wonks, any heritage wonks in the house? Lovers of history, yes, yes. Then you know that historic sites in a lot of main cities across Europe and this part of the world we call the Americas have moved from historic sites being just focused on going to the, the tea or the conversation and walking around and seeing the ladies in the bonnets and the dresses baking cookies. There's a very big connection between the themes that come out of those sites and the historic significance and the connection to our lives today. And when you live in a city like we do, where you can tour the globe culturally in Toronto and with your palette, language, like we are a very diverse city and there's a diverse cultural community association for every cultural group in this city. It becomes really essential for us to connect thematically how these places connect to the lived experiences of people present, and we'll want them to care about how those lived experiences and themes might help us chart healthier paths to the future. I think this belief in culture as a safe space for difficult conversations is particularly important for museums that have historic roots as the springboard from which they play in the world. Next slide. So already said the 10 museums, just to give you a sense of some of the themes we're looking at. We are moving, I started back at the city, because I did mention I worked here previously. I came back in the summer of 2024, so I'm a year and a half into this time period here. And one of the key things that we started to shift to was one central theme, because when you have that many sites that are covering the city broadly, you have to start to think about what's the point of entry, how do you invite people in? So we are currently working from one theme. This year it was home. And we basically had sub-themes at each of the sites that allowed people to feel that they had a sense of what we were talking about and how one experience at one museum site might make you curious to go experience another. Always rooted in the history and the themes, but also at its center is about how we're supporting community. And this leads me to my colleague Aderonke's references to Culture Connects. One of the threads we've picked up in the museums is that space piece. If you are familiar with what's happening in the arts and culture scene in Toronto, you know how expensive space is and how at a premium it is, especially for young artists, collectives, curators, but also on the history side for culturally specific community associations that are holding their own stuff and want to tell those stories. So we're very focused on how we're calling community in, doing call for proposals and splitting up what might be a large budget for us to program the sites to share that money with the public for call-in. So if you're one of those people that's doing stuff in community, please do check out the site. I'm sure by the end of this, you'll also know how to find me directly. there's a lot of people who know how to find me directly and just email me, say, Karen, I want to do this. How do I make that happen? Next slide. So please do reach out, because that calling in is a real key part of how we will be working going forward. This is just reminding us about the fact that we are very interested in centering visitors in what we do. The visitor experience becomes really key, because these are your sites. They are public institutions. They're publicly run entities. And so the center of what we do is about what is the visitor experience when someone comes to the site, how are they experiencing it? And that is both about an understanding of how, if you're local tourism, again, echoing my colleague Ida Ronque's comment, if you're a local tourist in your city, it makes it easier for global tourists when they visit to know what to do. We usually tell people where they should be, partly because we're showing up there, but also because often friends, family, emails come, hey, I'm coming to town, or through a friend, and they want you to direct them to where they should go. Next slide. So this is just me showing off our cool staff at Scarborough Museum after one of our all-staff meetings. Next slide. So this one is the one I was eager to get to, because it is showing you where the sites are located. So you can see we kind of cover the city from Etobicoke, where Montgomery's Inn is located, to Scarborough Museum being located in Thompson Park, to Zion Schoolhouse and Gibson House, which are in North York. And then you can see the juxtaposition of what's in the core, the lowest of which would be Fort York. So I always say that our museum sites cover from Etobicoke to Scarborough and Fort York to North York. And in that way, we really do have a sense of where, of the whole city, and our desire is to encourage you to investigate the whole city. So let me be specific now. How many people have ever been to the Scarborough Museum in Thompson Park? Oh, wow. See that? See, now we got to fill that out. We got to work on that. What about Montgomery's in Etobicoke? So was the plethora of hands all Fort York? It was, wasn't it? Y'all are at the parties at Fort York. That's what's happening. Okay, next slide. So this, we're just going to jump through, and my esteemed colleague is just going to give, like, you know, 1,000, 2, 1,000, and flip to the next. So I'm going to roll through the slides so you get a sense of what each museum site is about. So Travelers Hub, Colburn Lodge is in High Park. Our next one is showing you the birthplace of modern Toronto. We're going to linger here for a bit, because Fort York is a really important site, especially in this time. And this is partly to highlight how at the city we do have an understanding of responding to important moments in the work that we do in museums. So I referenced already going into the collection to pull things related to the Blue Jays in the 90s, as we were hoping for another World Series win, and that beautiful run that we just came to the end of in the fall. As we are dealing with the situation south of the border and conversations around tariffs and looking at potentially the change in a very close relationships with our U.S. cousins, Fort York becomes a really important measure of history because of the War of 1812, and because that site was the place that Indigenous, Black, and redcoat, quote unquote, English European descent soldiers would have fought for defending this country we now call Canada. So there are times where you end up drilling more deeply into a particular place because of an understanding of how that place is relevant to thematically, because I don't think we're all thinking we're going to war tomorrow, although emotionally we might be, you know, in fighting mode, but we're not actually anticipating there. But it is about how do we now need to think differently about our relationship with the U.S.? And one of that, frankly, not just for Canada, but globally, is about military arsenal. For one who are more intelligent in such things than I, may say that we've seen the world very much depend on U.S. military powers for global influence. And if there's a shift economically, because often that connection between the fighter and the money were in bed together, and if that is shifting, what does that mean? So we are aware of how the work of this historic site may be a part of educating Canadians about the past as we reflect on how we might map the future. Next slide. St. Lawrence Market. When was the last time y'all were in St. Lawrence Market? I can say that I go all the time. I sometimes just walk through and dream about the beautiful things I'd like to buy. My budget does not allow me to shop at St. Lawrence Market. See, I see the nods. I'm with you. But I'm also there because the Market Gallery is one of my favorite sites. It's a beautiful old council hall that we have been using as more of a fine art and ephemera mix of exhibitions. The exhibition that's on there currently, Home, is kind of our anchor exhibition. So please do maybe go have a treat and take yourself upstairs to see this great space. Next slide. What about Mackenzie House? That one's a hidden one. I love how far you're like, I know Mackenzie House. It's a great one, isn't it? I love the print shop. And it's one of those houses, again, that because of its connection with the past and present, we have done some work, and this was my predecessor before I came, where there was a shift to look at that house and its relationship for William Lyon Mackenzie's newspaper to activism, to using the press for social activism, and recognizing that Marianne Shadd would have been close by doing the same with the Provincial Freeman. So those stories are both connected into that site. And that, for me, echoes the importance, again, of how do you take the individual stories of historic sites and pull them into contemporary narratives through thematic approaches. Next slide. This is our mini Downton Abbey, which is what I like to call Spadina Museum. It's the upstairs, downstairs house. It's the house with a beautiful garden that looks like it's just flowers, and then you get closer and realize that it's flowers and food. And there's a whole theme there around class, because they planted food in between the flower beds because it wouldn't have seemed proper that they were planting their own food, but because of the house coming into the 1920s and the impact of war and on an economic downturn on the way that property was run, planting their own food was a key part of the way, frankly, they were able to function. Just a really fascinating history in this property, and often is the place that we bring the textiles out. If you love a green space and a hidden gem, you must love Todmorden Mills. It's close to the Brickworks, so I feel like if you go to the Brickworks, you should just cycle over, nodding. I love when I see the nods. I'm picking up the nods of all the recognition. Warms my heart. But Todmorden Mills also has a really beautiful gallery and a really beautiful theater space. Thank you for the time check. So if you are in the live arts, as they will say, or the performing arts, you should definitely check out that space because of its affordability. Next slide. This is our lovely Jem Gibson House in the north end of the city. And it's very much about kind of the middle class home, and would have been kind of like a very suburban at the time, because what the hub of York, which is right downtown by St. Lawrence Market, getting all the way out there up to North York would have been a trek in the 19th century. And then we come to our time capsule of education. And if you go to the last slide, you will give me a couple of minutes to talk a little bit after we hit Scarborough to our gathering space theme. So this is our calling in, and it's a call out to all of you if you are interested in community activations that are about engaging the past and present, understanding what has happened with a particular place and its themes to what you might be doing today. If you're looking at FIFA next year and you're not really interested in kicking a football, but you might be interested in a project that's about movement, that's a performance artist, or just a project about, yoga or Tai Chi. We have a whole bunch of themes related to everything from movement in museums to cultural activations and historic connections that we're calling in. And I would be remiss if I didn't take the time to say to all of you, please check out our website and maybe come play with us, see what collaborations might be possible. And I think that's it for me. That's just showing you what the landing page looks like. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Wow, I'm getting excited about the cultural part of FIFA. So our next speaker is Mike Tanner. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Good to see so many fresh young faces here in Council Chamber. That's a little bit of an anomaly here. I'm going to talk about our creative industries, film and entertainment industries. Before I get into it, I'm going to follow the lead of my colleagues and let you know a little bit of the circuitous path that led me here to the sacred corridors of City Hall. I think if you talk to a lot of people of a certain age about how they got where they are, the path will be a little bit winding and weaving. But I'm from Vancouver originally, and I went to UBC out there, and I studied philosophy and English literature, which prepared me for a career in a rock band playing across Canada. And I did that for way too many years, too many winters, and ended up here in Toronto, and about a half century later, ended up running a music festival called North by Northeast, which was and still is a fairly significant annual festival. And then when the city created a music office in 2014, I was hired to come into that role. I knew a lot of people by then in the music industry, and strangely enough, I knew a fair few people in municipal government as well. So here I am. I'll say this, I'm speaking here today about all of our creative industries, and that is film, music, creative technology, and the visitor economy, but I'm not an expert in any of them except music. So with Kate's assistance, we'll move quite quickly through the slides. You'll see a lot of numbers, economic impact, that kind of thing, but I'm not going to delve into every detail on every slide. If you have questions afterwards about any of those other disciplines beyond music, I'll be happy to connect you with my colleagues in our section for a follow-up. So creative industries really focus on monetizing intellectual property, creating jobs, creating economic impact. In Toronto, we focus mostly on film and television production, music, as I say, digital technology, creative tech, as it's called, which includes video game development, immersive media, VR, virtual reality, esports, things like that. An important point to note about creative industries is that includes not just not-for-profit organizations, but also for-profit businesses. For example, in the music sector, my stakeholders include everybody from Live Nation and the major record labels down to the most grassroots organizations. Next slide, please, Kate. Key points on why they matter to the people in them and to us as a city government is that creative industries really provide high growth potential. We find that a lot of times equity-deserving populations are more engaged in some of the creative industries than in other more institutional walks of life, particularly at the grassroots level. And the last point on the slide is also worth noting here is that creative industries, through their output, entertainment, culture, create cultural vibrancy and engagement with the city. It puts the city on the map, and it gives people things to do and things to feel proud about in Toronto. Our four units here in FEI, as it's called, Film Office, Music Office, Office of Creative Technology, as I mentioned, and the Office of the Visitor Economy. Visitor economy is about tourism, so it's not a creative industry per se, but it's a thread with connectivity to the other three offices that we run here. Thanks, Kate. We support these four sectors in a number of ways. Key points here is that we really take our cues from the industries that we represent. Both film and music have advisory boards. I work closely with a 22-member advisory board called Toronto Music Advisory Committee, TMAC for short. There's a film board, and both of these boards will tell the city, here's what's of concern, here's are the opportunities, here are the challenges, here's where things sit at this moment. We, on the other hand, are the voice of those industries here at City Hall. We leverage what the city can do, which can sometimes be to bring a conversation together, to create business-to-business connections, to do some intergovernmental advocacy when appropriate through our elected officials or senior leadership team, working with other city divisions to help create opportunities or remove barriers for industries and creativity seeking to thrive. And when we get into the details of the industries, the film industry, you'll see some pretty big numbers on there. $2.5 billion plus in Toronto, 35,000 jobs. A lot of those jobs are unionized, so there's a great degree of stability. A lot of the business is international. Toronto is actually the 5th largest film TV production jurisdiction in North America. Tons of movies, television commercials, TV shows are set here. And those of you who live near or occasionally venture down to the Portlands, we'll see a lot of the studio space down there, Revival 929, Pinewood, and there's a lot of studio space out in Etobicoke as well, and this is growing here in Toronto. We support the film industry in 2 distinct but related ways. We have a film office with around 10 film permit coordinators who provide permits for location managers seeking to film on public property, be it streets, parks, TTC lands, other areas in the public realm. And at the same time, we do a lot of sector development work, which really focuses around a number of key points. Workforce development, there's a lot of preparation done to ready young people for jobs in the industry. And again, we're hearing from the industry about where the jobs and the opportunities are there. The mayor and key councillors have traveled a number of times to Los Angeles, and earlier this year to London and Dublin to promote Toronto as a film district, to draw in more of that international business. And there's always a cognition of climate action, greening the industry as it is, like things like power drops so people don't have to run generators all over the city, and a community relations piece under the brand XOTO. I've got a couple of cool black golf caps that I use for walking the dog, and it says XOTO on them, and that's a public relations exercise on behalf of the film industry. So this is my personal bailiwick, is the music office. Again, some pretty impressive numbers. Live music alone, not including recording, not including publishing, not including education, not including agencies and managements, just live venues alone, $850 million a year, and the equivalent of 10,000 full-time jobs in Toronto. The business of music in Canada is really concentrated here. When you talk about record labels, management, agency, production, publishing, lots and lots of registered SOCAN songwriters living here, and we're obviously the home to all the major record labels and management companies here in Toronto. Next slide, Kate, thanks. We support the music sector in a variety of different ways. Key areas are, I think, one or both of my colleagues, Aderonke and Karen, referenced the needs around space and place. That really strikes the music ecosystem hard, and so we focus a lot of our attention around mitigating the loss of music space and trying to open up new areas for music to happen. I'll talk about a couple of those towards the end of the presentation. We also do a lot of work alongside our night economy office to make sure that there is alignment between what we're doing to promote and grow and enhance the city's night economy and how that touches the music space. We do a lot of professional development as well, mostly in conjunction with industry partners to make sure that young people in educational institutions or not in educational institutions are finding out about the right kinds of training and jobs to move into the industry. And the other thing that my office does on the regular is we've got a database of around 1,000 Toronto artists, and we help provide paid performance opportunities for those artists, for example, at both airports and a number of other spaces and places with partners, programming opportunities throughout the year. Thanks, Kate. Creative technology, our third of 4 clusters here. Units in film and entertainment industries. Creative tech also known as digital media, interactive digital media, includes primarily video game development, publishing, virtual reality, augmented reality, immersive exhibitions, things like Immersive Van Gogh or Arcadia Earth in the Well, things like that, and of course esports. Very big jurisdiction here for creative tech. Ontario is North America's second largest tech cluster, and it's growing quickly. Almost 300 interactive digital media companies. Most of them are in video game development, and a ton of international work going on there as well. City supports creative tech with a number of different strategies and initiatives: Future Makers, the Future of Entertainment series, attraction of companies and events, and really growing the areas that are already doing well, those being video gaming and immersive experiences. This is a relatively new area for the city, and we have a colleague who is really well connected in the industry and works closely with the industry to help shape the city's response to supporting creative tech. The fourth of four is the visitor economy. This is about tourism. So our visitor economy office in-house works closely with Destination Toronto, which is an external arm's length agency, on engaging and enhancing the tourist economy. Again, some pretty big numbers here. I think if you'd sort of polled people globally, Toronto wouldn't come up as a massively huge sort of Paris or London or New York level tourist destination, but between the major sporting events, between concert experiences like this time last year's Taylor Swift taking over the city, and a really robust convention business, Toronto does get over 25 million visitors a year, with a lot of, as you can imagine, spin-off economic direct and indirect impacts as well. Some of the money coming into the city through tourism allows us to have things that we wouldn't have otherwise. And what the Visitor Economy Office does really focuses its efforts on, again, referenced earlier in an earlier presentation, the idea of tourism being not just attracting people from outside the jurisdiction, but making sure that Torontonians get out and enjoy what's in their neighborhood and across the city as well. Workforce development, training people for jobs in the industry, and tourism information services are other ways in which that's supported. Generally, the challenges for creative industries, so no surprise, small businesses are precarious, and there's a lot of fragility. I often talk about the music ecosystem being a very fragile ecosystem, notwithstanding, you know, Live Nation and Rogers Stadium and big concerts. At the grassroots, which is the most important level in many ways, it is precarious. There's very little property ownership. If you've ever wondered about why a music venue went out of business, for example, it's nearly always because they didn't own the building in which they were situated. And things happen, macroeconomics things happen. And like independent coffee shops or cool little bookstores, they can be threatened and they disappear. And the same is true in creative tech as well. COVID hurt everybody. A lot of our sectors haven't yet fully recovered. I don't need to tell you this, but Toronto is an expensive city to live in. If you're a young person, particularly if you're a young person going into something a little off-center, like one of the creative industries or arts and culture, this is a tough place to live. So that is a sort of existential threat that we have to deal with here as well. Next slide, please, Kate. This and the next slide really focus on bringing things together, making sure that we bridge the gaps between these creative industries to help support each of them individually. And on the next slide, I'm going to focus mostly on the pictures on the right there, as we move into a couple of quick examples of how we've done this. What you see there, that bleak picture at the top, is a building on Queen West, near Queen and Augusta. If any of you have ever been out late several years ago and gone to that Kentucky Fried Chicken at the bottom of Queen and Augusta, which is now no longer there, that building there at 468 Queen West, just west of Spadina, was a sporting goods store, S'il vous plaît Sports, SVP Sports, and the lower picture is what it is now, which is the It's OK studio. Next slide. This is an example of how Toronto leased out at below market rate a city-owned property to a really cool grassroots music organization to make interesting things happen. In 2022, the building became available. Parks and Rec owned it and still own it. They had and still have plans for what it's going to be. It's going to be a park, which is adjacent to an affordable housing development close by. But what we did there, because we had council direction to do so, was to explore what's called a meanwhile lease. These are very popular in Europe. We're not so big on them in North America, but we're getting there, which means that you know the building or the space or the place is going to become something else in the fullness of time. But meanwhile, can we do something more creative than putting up a chain link fence around it and see what happens? And so we canvassed some grassroots music organizations. There was a request for expression of interest process. It's OK Community Arts was chosen as a successful proponent. And what you see there is the kind of thing that's happening now in the space. And it will happen until this early 2026. It's a great event space. There are about 10,000 square feet on 3 floors. That's the main floor that you see there. There are music festivals that happen there. There are workshops. There are film screenings. There are theater productions. There's mentorship. There's lectures. There's all kinds of different things. And it's a really vibrant cultural hub. If you haven't been, I really suggest that you go. You can find them on Instagram and find out what the programming is coming up. And we're now looking, as their lease comes up for expiry next year, for a new home in a city-owned space for It's OK Community Arts. Next slide, and this is the last example I'll give. When the pandemic hit, live music venues, grassroots live music venues, were hit very, very hard. They weren't doing any curbside pickup for meals. So City Council, in conjunction with our Music Advisory Committee and other divisions, we were able to create a property tax break for every eligible live music venue. So from that day to this, if you're a live music venue meeting certain criteria that we establish, you get 50% of your municipal property tax back. In the first year in 2020, we had about 45 venues apply and be deemed eligible. We're up to over 70 now, and as you can imagine, it's a significant financial benefit for the venues that qualify. On the last slide, I will just say thank you for your attention, and I know you're all going to be working either in government or running the world in some other way in the fullness of time, but in the meantime, if you're looking for things that you can do in a concrete way, I'll tell you this place never hears from young people. They never, ever hear from young people. I think it's anybody under 40. So municipal government is the easiest way to get involved. If you have something, an idea, or a way that you want to, something you want to suggest, get in touch with your city councilor and say, hey, I and 10 of my friends really think this. We really want to move the needle in this way. We've got this idea. You can contact me or contact any of my colleagues or contact the city generally and get engaged and involved. And I think that would help with some of the things we're trying to do in support of the creative industries. Thanks for your time. Good to see you all here.
Yeah, thanks so much. You know, you talked about a couple of things. Meanwhile Spaces is such an incredibly important strategy and so connected, I think, to Aderonke's conversation about trying to find 1 million additional square feet and, you know, working with developers and the city, the Toronto Arts Council and Foundation. We use It's OK Studio all the time for our events. I think you did a great setup for our next speaker, who is our chief planner, Jason Thorne, all about space and complete communities and culture. Over to you.
Great. Thanks very much. And I'm over here, and I'm going to sit because I'm going to be flipping my own slides from my laptop. So hopefully everybody can see me okay and hear me okay. So I'm Jason Thorne, Chief Planner. I saw you all about 2 weeks ago, where I presented on this topic, planning for growth in the City of Toronto. So this morning I'm going to be talking about planning for arts and culture in the City of Toronto. I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of Hamilton into the presentation. So I've been at the City of Toronto as Chief Planner for a year. Before I came here, I spent 10 years at the City of Hamilton, where I headed up the Planning and Economic Development Department. The interesting thing there was I had a broader portfolio in Hamilton. So not only was I in charge of planning, I was also in charge of economic development, arts, culture, film, tourism. So I had this kind of packaged portfolio that allowed me to kind of do a lot of work at, I would say, the interface between planning and development and art and culture. And I can tell you there's a lot of fun that happens in that space. But I thought I should probably start maybe a little bit by just explaining at least why I think I was invited to be on this panel as the chief planner. It may not be sort of the most obvious choice when I'm on a panel here with people who are very expert in this space of arts and culture. And so when I think of planning, I often come back to this quote, which I've always quite liked, by Christopher Hume, who was the architecture critic at I think it was the Toronto Star for a number of years. And he talked about that culture is to the contemporary city what roads, sewers, and bridges were in the 19th and early 20th centuries. What this comment means to me is that we really need to think of arts and culture as basic infrastructure of a successful city. And then the role of planners, the role of planning departments is to support and nurture and plan for this type of infrastructure, just like we do for transit, just like we do for water, just like we do for sewers. And so what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that I've been a part of here at the City of Toronto, previously at the City of Hamilton, that in some cases have played, I think, a direct role in supporting and facilitating arts and culture, and in some cases, maybe more of an indirect role. And I'll just start with how you plan for it to begin with. So a lot of planning work, we do a neighborhood plan, what we sometimes call a secondary plan, where we think about, okay, how much growth is going to come to Midtown, or to the downtown, or to North York, or to Scarborough Centre. And we do these large-scale land use plans. Here's where the growth is going to be, here's where the buildings are going to go. But then we also, as part of that, think very carefully about the infrastructure we're going to need to sustain and support that growth over the next 20, 30, 40 years. So yeah, there's a transportation plan that gets done as part of that work. There's a servicing plan. We also look at community services and facilities planning, and we forecast out what we think the needs are going to be in these neighborhoods over the next 20, 30, 40 years. We also look at our employment areas, and a lot of our planning work is looking at protecting certain employment areas. The protected employment areas, they're not a huge part of the city, but just over 11% of the city's land area is protected employment areas, but they do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of economic development and jobs. 24% of all the jobs in the city, 29% of all the businesses in the city. Now, usually when you're talking to people about employment areas, their minds immediately go to, oh, that means manufacturing, that means warehousing, which is true. But these are also really critical areas for arts and culture, for film, for production studios, for a number of different reasons. One is they offer opportunities for large-scale buildings and spaces, which are very hard to find in any sort of residential neighborhood. Land costs are frankly lower, so it's hard to compete in the cultural space to acquire a piece of land or to acquire a lease in an area that is residential, because the costs are a lot higher in a residential area. And then a lot of the same kind of conflicts between land uses that you get with a manufacturing, a warehouse use, applies to many of the cultural uses that we're trying to protect in this city. Noise, parking, access, late night loading, all of these things happen in the cultural space just like they do in the manufacturing space. So these employment areas, when we talk about them in planning, we're not just talking about them in terms of, this is where we're going to have heavy manufacturing or assembly. This is places where we're going to have film, recording studios, art fabrication, all of these kinds of uses. Then we look at the zoning tool, one of the key tools that's available to planners in terms of regulating land use. This is actually an initiative from the City of Hamilton. We had done a music strategy in the City of Hamilton, and we identified within what we called our venue ladder. So to have a successful music city, you want to have venues at all scales. A place where an artist starting out who can only kind of sell 5 seats, a place for them to perform, a place where you can sell 15,000 seats, and everything in between. And we had some missing rungs on our ladder in the City of Hamilton. And those rungs were often in like the 300, 400, 500 seats. That's a tough one for the music industry to sustain. What we had was a lot of places of worship that were underutilized. So what we did was a zoning initiative to actually rezone a number of these places of worship to also have the opportunity to become performance spaces. So you could actually run music performances in these locations. We also looked at our employment areas. Now this is going back, 8, 9, 10 years ago. All the stuff I just said about employment areas and how they are important for arts and culture uses, At the time in Hamilton, a lot of our zoning actually didn't permit those uses. So we rezoned a lot of our employment areas to say, look, we don't care if you are fabricating or if you're building cars or if you're fabricating public art. Manufacturing is manufacturing, creation is creation. And so we rezoned a bunch of our employment areas to very intentionally open them up to the kinds of arts and culture uses that we were trying to nurture across the city. This is a site, if you're ever in Hamilton, you should check it out. It's called the Cotton Factory Center for the Arts, a former cotton factory. Now it's, I lost track, many different kinds of art studios located within that facility. Within our neighborhoods, if you've been watching the news, we had a big report go to council last week that was approved around commercial uses in neighborhoods. Now, most of the attention on that report was corner stores, coffee shops, cafes. That's mostly what kind of everybody in the media was talking about. But there's some other important things in there as well. Art galleries, artist studios, small-scale workshops, performing arts, production studios. These kinds of things were also part of that permission, those new commercial permissions that now exist in residential areas. So again, if you're looking for a nice small-scale space, this opens up large new areas of the city where you can start and have one of these businesses. A couple of speakers have already spoken about this one, meanwhile uses. So in Toronto, a lot of sites that are going through change, a lot of sites that are planned, slated to become major new mixed-use developments. What do we do in meanwhile? What do we do while we're waiting for that? Especially important right now as we're starting to see a slowdown in activity in the residential sector. We've got these sites that are going to get redeveloped. What can we do to make productive use out of them in the interim? And so we have actually, Toronto's one of the few cities that I'm aware of that actually has proactively identified meanwhile uses as a thing in our zoning bylaw. So we have zoned areas of the waterfront, we have zoned areas of Downsview to explicitly permit these kinds of temporary meanwhile uses, many of them in that arts and culture space. Protecting some of our historical cultural assets. A lot of the work that my team does is around, under the Heritage Act, we're protecting historic buildings, heritage buildings. Many of those actually are some of our historic cultural facilities, some of our historic venues. And so one of the tools we do have in planning is for the most important of these kinds of institutions is to actually use some of the tools of the Heritage Act to protect them. Culturally significant businesses. What we often hear when we're talking in neighborhoods is, the thing that they love about their neighborhood is not so much the building itself. In fact, a lot of these buildings are really very nondescript. The uses inside them are cherished, and the uses inside them are really important to those neighborhoods. We hear this in Church and Wellesley. We hear this in Little Jamaica. We hear this in Malvern. We hear this in Chinatown, all over the city. And so here we have very limited tools as planners to say, okay, we can permit a use. We can't force you as to what that use will be. But we're actually working with economic development right now on some additional tools that we can kind of collectively apply to say, where we've identified these really culturally significant businesses in areas where we know there's going to be a lot of change in the coming years. How can we make sure some of those businesses can still find a place within that neighborhood? Sometimes this might be a music venue. That's a common one. Often it's like it's a barbershop. It's a fast food restaurant that's been there for a number of years. So they can take many forms, the common ingredient being that these are just really important places in the neighborhood. And then through the planning process, we can also create new cultural spaces, and Adirondacke referred to this. Now, this space was created with a planning tool that we actually don't have anymore. We used to have a planning tool called Section 37 that allowed us, as part of new development, to negotiate with developers that in exchange for the additional density permissions, they would deliver certain community benefits. This is a theater, actually right around the corner from my house, that was created through something like that. So as part of the development, now the developer didn't create the entire space, but they contributed a portion of it. The theater create a portion of it, and so now you have this really lovely art space within a what above is a mixed-use development. Now we have very limited ability to do this anymore. That tool was removed. The province removed that tool a couple of years back. We now have a much more limited tool called community benefits charges, but it does still provide opportunity at a much smaller scale to do this type of thing. So part of the role of planning, most of what I've talked about is, okay, you can create opportunities for cultural uses, create the bricks and mortar that supports cultural uses. But one thing that I think also is important in planning and thinking about our city is how can you find ways to make artistic expression part of the city itself, to think about the city itself as a cultural opportunity, as a work of art. I don't know if folks know the late Pierre Giorgio Chico. He was actually the poet laureate at the City of Toronto for a number of years. And this is a quote of his, that a city that's taken the time to dress itself well, is aware of itself as a work of art, is beautiful to its citizens. This is a part of planning as well. We can't just be about the bricks and mortar. We can't just be about the housing in the streets. So we have a number of programs around public art in the city. One of them being, as we're negotiating new development, negotiating contributions to public art. In some cases, they might be a financial contribution where a number of developments will contribute to a pot of money that creates a public art opportunity, or they integrate it with their new development. This is a piece, I quite like this one. This is in North York. It's a park, I always struggle with pronunciation, Athenana Westashen Park. And this is a fence. Parks often have fences, and it's got a functional purpose in that it fences off. You can't tell because there's snow on the ground in this picture, but that's a sports field under the snow. But they made that fence a piece of art with, this is an artist collective out of Rotterdam called De Makersvan. And they create these lace fences. So you can see kind of the lace work that's integrated in the fence. So it's not just this utilitarian piece of infrastructure, it's actually a piece of art. And we have we have about over 200 now public artworks around the city that were created through and as part of development. Some of that means involving artists in the design of new public spaces. This was an initiative that my team, that Economic Development, was involved in with the Ossington BIA, creating these little small parkettes, small seating areas around the BIA, but also working with artists as part of those teams to create artworks. This is a piece, the yellow arch here is a piece by the artist Philip Cote. And then also involving artists in the design of public infrastructure. So public art doesn't have to be, and in my view, it doesn't have to be like these, a statue, a large kind of element within the public realm. My favorite public art is often art that is just integrated within. It's part of the landscape. It's part of the functional elements of a space. And so often when we're doing major public infrastructure works, this is the Glen Road Bridge that was just redone on Bloor Street. And or going over Bloor, and as part of that work, the architecture firm that did the bridge also had an artist as part of their team to do these public artworks around as well. And so this is an Indigenous artist named Cousin Van Hoevelen, who did this particular piece. And then just creating beauty in the built environment itself. Every building we build, every public space we create, big or small, how can we kind of find ways to make these beautiful? And how, again, we have limited authorities to do this, but we do still have opportunities through our urban design review of a new development. We have them present often to a panel of experts we have called our design review panel, who will comment on the design and architecture of the building. When we're doing our own public works, our own public infrastructure and public buildings, looking at how we procure that. Are we procuring just to get the cheapest possible outcome? Are we going to just hire who's ever going to give us the lowest bid on a new procurement? Are we going to give points and weight to those who actually will create beautiful, achieve design excellence in what they're doing in the city? So I'm going to end with this about how, one of the important ways how planners can help celebrate and support arts and culture in the work that we do in planning is to actually work with the arts community in how we plan and design the city. Bring them into the thinking around planning and design. Peter Kageyama is an author of a book that I quite liked called For the Love of Cities. And he talks a lot about what he called the co-creators and how public officials like myself have to think of ourselves and the work that we do as co-creating a city alongside the entrepreneurs, the artists, the performers, the organizers, the advocates, all of these kind of, the citizens who, as Kageyama said, they make things and they make things happen. So this is kind of this partnership between city officials and people in the arts community. And to do that, I'm going to go back to our former poet laureate. Sometimes the most important things a city official can do is maybe just get out of the way a little bit. I love this line he had, that the allowance of the random is the mark of a city's health. How invited do artists and others feel that they can actually shape the city themselves directly, not having to go through public officials like all of us up here on the stage? So how do you leave space for them? And how do you remove barriers? So give a couple of quick examples. This is one that we did in Hamilton a few years back when I was there, and that we had a prohibition, and this frankly is quite common in cities, is we had a prohibition on amplified music on patios. So we had all these patios popping up around the city, but you couldn't actually have a performer kind of perform on one of these patios. So we changed our zoning bylaws and noise bylaws to eliminate that as a prohibited use. Toronto has done this as well, although I will say that Hamilton did it first. We did it, and I think it was like 2018, 2019. Toronto only did this like 2 years ago. So Hamilton kind of set the stage, and then everybody copied us. Street encroachments. This is another one very common in cities. If you want to kind of put out some seating, put out some, a flower stand, these sorts of things, you have to get an encroachment agreement with the city to have the right to kind of use this space. One of the initiatives we did in Hamilton was to eliminate that requirement. It was, eliminate the cost of having to enter into those encroachment agreements. Working on temporary installations. This is back to Toronto now, where city planning's been working for actually the last couple of years with a group in Scarborough around all of the sort of the strip plazas that you think of, think Lawrence, Lawrence Avenue, and kind of that sort of wonderful ecosystem of restaurants and shops in those strip plazas. And we've been working with a community group there around how do we create these temporary installations in the parking lots to create both seating opportunities, so they have a functional role, but also these kinds of pinpricks of beauty around the neighborhood. The Plaza Pops is on private property, looking at our public property as well. So this was an artist call that had been done a few years back around temporary seating installations as part of the King Street pilot project. So I'll end it there, and just with I hope what that kind of set of examples gives is that, in my view, there very much is, a role for planners and planning and the planning profession in thinking about how we're actually making the arts and culture part of our cities. And I think as I was listening to kind of some of the other speakers as well, and thinking about kind of the work that we do in the day-to-day, what I have found in my experience is that no one profession, no one team at City Hall has all of the tools necessary to have a really thriving arts and culture system, but we all have at least one or two. And so I think the key is thinking about what those tools are and how those tools can contribute to kind of the greater good. And planning is absolutely part of that conversation. So I will end there. Thank you.
Yeah, wow, thank you. I can't say how refreshing it is to have a chief planner who has a history of having been responsible for public art and arts and culture. I mean, it's just a whole different worldview. And I know, Adiranga, you come from planning into arts and culture. I know Karen's background is, building organizations in the arts and culture sector. And now she's with the city, looking and working with museums. And Mike has this history as a musician and also a promoter. So I think we've got a really amazing interdisciplinary team here working on, the challenges for the city. So we're moving into Q&A. I'm just going to do a little bit of rule setting. If you're joining this session virtually and would like to submit a question during the session, please enter it into the Q&A feature at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And if you're joining us in person and are sitting in the council member's chair, you can speak into the built-in mics. I will point to you or call on you. To use the mics, press the speaking button. Once your question is asked, turn it off. We also have a wireless microphone which can be brought to your seat when you raise your hand, and we will walk the microphone to you. So don't give your name, address, and serial number. No. So remain anonymous, please. And I'm going to kick off with a question which is about kind of all the other sessions we've had here. So the City of Toronto is committed to a major investment in arts and culture through the Culture Connect strategy. And what arguments will you use over the coming years as Canada faces tough economic times to convince the public and different sectors of our city that culture is of essential value? So I don't know, Adiranga, if you want to pick that up, if others do, and then we will move out to take questions from the students.
Starting with an easy one, right? A gimme. Yeah, I think that one of the pieces that is core, and I sort of started here, is culture, arts and culture, creativity, creative industries, it's, fundamental to making the city a great place to be, but it's also such a key contributor to the economy of the city. And I think to not bear that in mind, not bear in mind both what actually keeps the people who live here living here and draws more people in as they think about places that they might live around the city, around the world. I think that that's a critical piece that we need to think of as a city, as a province, as a country, and the enduring value of arts and culture to that consideration. I don't think changes. Does it get harder to find money to do things when you have competing things that you want to do with that money? Yes, but I think that that's a constant.
Any other? Yeah, Jason.
Okay, it was often one actually that I struggled with having that portfolio in Hamilton and was trying to make the argument for investment in that sector, and integrating with economic development was very important. I sometimes don't love the fact that you kind of have to put everything into economic development terms in order to make a case, but it's an important part of the story and the argument for that kind of investment, and we did talk about it as investment. The one thing I'll tell you that's interesting, because we obviously work with a lot of private developers, and a lot of them really get it. Like, you will often be working with private developers. They want these kinds of uses integrated with their buildings because they know what it means to the desirability of their building, people wanting to live there, the energy that it creates. You can see it in the names that developers use. They often call like we just had one around the corner open up called Artist Alley. Like, they like this association with the arts and culture. And to me, that's a powerful statement that, like, the private sector gets it. The private sector gets that these kinds of investments really add value.
Actually, Artist Alley had a Section 37 with OCAD University where we were training our students in our public art minor to work with that development. So it's a great example. And we have a question over here.
I have 3 questions actually, but do we have enough time for all of them? Or?
No, but we're going to start with one.
Sure.
And then we'll share the space. Thanks.
This is a question for, I guess, both Mike and Jason. So you both mentioned meanwhile leases. So what happens if, like, the business that is given this meanwhile lease becomes wildly successful, and then they're forced to relinquish the space because there's a planned, it was only a temporary lease? Do you support them in moving to a new venue or any other support?
That's a great question. Thanks for that. In the case of the It's Okay Studio, for example, yes, there is a lot of support and a lot of interest and council direction for the city to work cross-divisionally with our division, with planning, with corporate real estate management, CREM, with Creatio, to find another site for It's Okay, because they have been wildly successful in every measure. It's a really vibrant cultural space. There's a lot going on there. It has definitely checked all the check boxes when you think about what a successful cultural hub should be. We've worked hard also with our colleagues in Parks and Rec to ensure all possible extensions could have been given. The last thing you want is for the building to be reclaimed, as it were, and then nothing to happen for the next 10 years. A couple of speakers referenced the slowness of the development cycle and the hiccups sometimes there. So we want to make sure that that's aligned. And we're looking around the city now at available and suitable space. One of the challenges, and Jason may want to expand on this, is that for arts and culture use, for entertainment use in the city, when you start looking at all of the criteria, the list gets pretty small. State of good repair, proximity to transit, distance from sensitive uses like hospitals or senior centers, zoning being appropriate, not an employment land if you're going to do performances, that kind of thing. So we, in fact, once I leave here today, I'm actually going up to look at a city-owned site on DuPont to see, is it suitable in any way for this kind of thing?
Great, thank you. We've got over here next. Thanks.
Hi, I have a question for Karen Carter. I'm just curious, how do you guys decide the themes for each museum site, or well, the central theme?
We have a chief curator, and part of the process is about them leading along with each of the site leads. We were also in the process of re-engaging a community advisory group so that the theme is influenced by community interests. It's also mainly about something that's really open. So I was commenting to the team that I went to a pop-up exhibition on a space, it might be the one you're talking about, just north of DuPont, south of Davenport on Bathurst. And they had an exhibition around design, and it was about home. So it was like, that was our theme this year. And then we bumped into this activation from a community group looking at home through design. And it had a mix of local designers and global who had made pieces and had a whole conversation about the significance of home and design. And you understand that if you're looking at furniture and such, but for us, historic houses made home make sense. And for next year, our theme is gathering. And that was thinking about FIFA and how people gather for major events like sporting events. But notions of gathering could also be about, you know, a cluster of people getting together to want to create something. So it's a mix of internal expertise and awareness of the city we're living in and what notes we think will invite people in, but also that engagement with an advisory.
Thanks so much, Karen. We have a question here.
Hi, my question is for Mr. Thorne. So you mentioned that public, like we're using public-private partnerships to install certain types of art. My question is, I do see a problem with that because potentially you're having the private sector decide what types of art are being featured, and this could lead to potentially some artists not being chosen, potentially not highlighting more divisive exhibits. How do you safeguard against that and actually kind of promote the diversity of Toronto and all of our opinions instead of just a private developer who may be catering to a certain audience?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I would say it's an important reason why you wouldn't want your only vehicle or mechanism for delivering public art in a community to be through private development. It is one, and it needs to be one of many. As I said, in some cases, what we negotiate is not a work of art that they themselves commission on their own property. It's a financial contribution, and then you pool those contributions, and then the city, through our public art process, creates a piece in a public space somewhere. So sometimes it's that mechanism. But if it's a larger scale site, quite often the developer wants to, and we want them to as well, is to integrate the art within their property. So yeah, that does give them sort of some agency over the selection of the artists and the type of art that they think would be appropriate to their site. It still goes through our Arts Commission, and I've got the name wrong. It's not called the Arts Commission, our Public Art Advisory Group that reviews those pieces. And then we do have some standards around that. So it's not a total, clean blank check in terms of what they create. But I would agree with you, if that were your only mechanism, then you would actually potentially eliminate opportunities for emerging artists and those sorts of things to actually participate. So I think it's great that Toronto has multiple channels through which art gets created.
Here's our last question.
Just testing the mic, okay. So I have a question for Jason. This is more of a close-ended question, but I'm sure that the closure of Imperial Pub is fresh on the minds of many people here. And you mentioned that, I understand that you mentioned that you have like less control as the planners over this kind of area with the culturally significant businesses, but it was ultimately the decision on the City of Toronto's part in order to approve this area for redevelopment. So I'm wondering like what kind of disconnect comes from like between your sector, the planning sector, and the ultimate decision in the end to close down a business like this when you have a focus on preserving culturally significant businesses?
And it's a question that comes back to sort of my comments about the tools in the toolbox. In the planning world, most of the tools we have available to us are about the bricks, the mortar, the physical buildings. How big can they be? How tall can they be? What uses can they have within them? It's challenging. We don't necessarily have the tools as to, if you have a commercial space, what type of commercial use do you put in there? We can't be that prescriptive in our planning approach. And we do have a very strong need for housing in the city, and so we do have pretty, we're creating more and more permissive environment to actually build new housing, and that does put at risk some of our historic buildings, some of our cultural spaces, and I think that's why looking at not just the planning tools, but things like the financial tools that were talked about by some of the previous speakers, the property tax classes, the work that we're doing right now with economic development on culturally significant businesses. You kind of need to bring all of these things together to preserve and protect some of those really critical businesses. But it's a limitation, and we often have to be just upfront with communities around, like, we get it, what you really want in the ground floor of this new building is a grocery store. We can create some design considerations that make it feasible and viable to have a grocery store, but we can't force the builder of this building to lease that space to a grocery store. It's just a limitation in the power and authority we have as planners. I've often joked that I'd love to have that magic wand that I think a lot of residents actually think that we have in city planning to dictate everything that happens everywhere to the nth degree, but we don't have that kind of authority.
Great, thank you. So thank you very much. We're going to now go to two students from OCAD University who have some words of thanks and a few comments. We're going to start with Frank Obano.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of OCAD University, I would like to say a huge thank you to the distinguished panel for providing us with this lecture, and also to City Hall for allowing us to receive this lecture within Council Chamber. And to Ms. Aderonke Akonde, the Director of Arts and Culture Services, I really appreciated when you expressed that the improvement in arts and culture starts with public engagement, and how public engagement plays a pivotal role in decision-making when it comes to arts and culture within the City of Toronto. And I also appreciated this because, as we all know, designing for the city requires insights from its inhabitants and also its immediate communities. And to Mr. Mike Tanner, the Director for Film and Entertainment Industries, you expressed that you help amplify the voices of industry players within City Hall to help create more opportunities and remove barriers that may hinder people from creating within the City of Toronto. Just by being within Toronto or the downtown area, I've been able to experience the work that these industries provide, either directly or indirectly. So I really appreciate that you're willing to make Toronto a space for creativity.
Thank you, Frank. And now Sarah Saramak will offer her thanks in a few words.
Hello. On behalf of OCAD U and all the students online and in person, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us and answer all of our questions. I first want to thank Karen Carter, the Director of Museums and Heritage Services, for talking to us about economic development and culture. You highlighted the importance of collecting, preserving, researching, and sharing Toronto's diverse stories through exciting and contemporary experiences, as well as the importance of visitors connecting with the city and the people who shape it. I really loved when you started us off with, I just pulled a quote from you. It said, "The things we have are significant because of the stories they tell us." And I really, really liked that, and I wanted to bring that one back. You kind of said it in passing, but I really wanted to bring it back. Your honest interest, as you put it, in history and heritage shines through when you talk about what you do. And your joy and enthusiasm are inspiring and very admirable. Next, I want to thank Jason Thorne, the Chief Planner and Executive Director, for talking to us about planning arts and culture in the cities and how we can find ways to make artistic expression a part of the city itself. As a Hamiltonian myself, I recognize the diverse arts culture that is woven deep within Hamilton, and I see the connections that are being made towards our city of Toronto to become more like my favorite city. As an environmental design student, I understand the built environment and what goes into planning these things, as well as the teamwork connections that need to be made to facilitate things and the processes that you are going through to make that happen for us in Toronto. So I thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So what a spectacular conversation we've had today. I think it makes us all, very optimistic about the future of our city when we see that relationship between economic development and culture and planning, and all of the tools that these folks are mobilizing to make our culture accessible, powerful, and a huge attractor to people all over the world. So thank you, and a round of applause